Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. That music means that here on the Hugh Hewitt Show, we are entering into the Hillsdale Dialogue, the last radio hour of each week, the last hour of broadcasting on the Salem News Channel, if you want to watch. Professor O'Toole is very good with the camera, so he's been working with us on the camera. So there he is again. He's back for part 9, and we are in the second half of book 4. Doctor, you're very good at this. You're bringing it down the level of the audience, and where we left off last week is America's done a pretty good job with its military, its guardians. It has never lurched for power. And I want to go back to the why is that? Because what Socrates says is that every good city needs wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. And then he transitions to the soul. But I want to go back to where we were last week at the end. Why do you think we've managed to hit the balance that our military has never done what we see everywhere else? Right? The military wanting rule.
Well, I might question the premise a little bit. I think in our own situation, you do have some serious overreaching within the military. I think in the Trump administration, there was serious resistance from the military to some of the things that Trump, that is the civilian leadership, that is the representative of we the people, wanted to do. And maybe most egregiously was the period after January 6th, where General Milley more or less made it clear, I'm in charge of the foreign policy of this country, not the president. So I'm not quite as sanguine about the situation, at least among the leadership of the military in our situation. And maybe that's partly because our regime is starting to suffer some of the problems that Socrates and Plato discuss in the Republic. That is, the military class has a bad or often has a poor education. Again, especially I'm thinking at the top, going to elite schools, and are promised great rewards and benefits and corporate boards and so forth. And so I'm not so sure that the military leadership is as simply loyal and devoted to the well-being of the country as it used to be.
I still have great confidence in it, but I will point out, and General Mattis listens to the program, he'll know what I'm talking about here. He did not write about this. When Donald Trump ordered him to kill Bashir Assad, he hung up the phone and said to all of his assembled team, we're not going to do any of that. And so it was a direct countermand of a direct presidential order. And that was the first time I can recall, although Alexander Haig in the final days of the Nixon administration directed Secretary of Defense Schlesinger to go very slow in implementing any presidential order that seemed out of the ordinary, sort of like Milley did after January 6th, which I think most Americans were comfortable with, although it was indeed unprecedented and General Milley's explanations of it have not been persuasive. I generally think, though, that our military at the very highest levels, field officers and above, not just the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but they're very, very content with their pensions and with their honors and with the opportunities that are available to them in the private sector when they retire.
Totally fair. I think there's always a normal tension, and this grew up in America in the post-war world between who's ultimately in charge and whether it's the civilian leadership or the military class. I mean, this is a problem that Nixon and Carter faced and so forth. So it's a perennial temptation. You could say, look, armed men, the men with the arms, are always going to be extremely powerful within the regime. And I think for Socrates and for Plato, the key question is, can you educate those men and can you give them the appropriate honors such that they won't use the power and force that they have to subvert the regime and rule it? Maybe a classic example is the Praetorian Guard more or less running Rome and controlling who's the emperor in the late empire.
Now, let me ask you, Daniel, when we talk about the rulers, not the guardians, there are three classes: artisans, working stiffs, and every kind of class. They can get the money. The guardians, who are the soldiers, and then we have the rulers. And there are three classes. Do you think our Supreme Court are actually the ruler? In other words, those nine, their decisions bind the president, and no president would think twice about rejecting. We've never had a president say no. Andrew Jackson sort of said no, but it didn't really come to that. And Jefferson kind of didn't have to say no because Marshall worked around him. But Nixon said yes. And I think had Mike Pence made a different decision, an unconstitutional decision, in my view, to set aside the Electoral College votes, the next day the Supreme Court would have ordered him to count it, and they would have been counted. Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think in our regime, the court still has the most legitimacy of any branch of government, in part because it's seen as the fundamental guardian of our rights and of the constitutional order. I guess I fear that even the courts and the Supreme Court are no longer really respected by the progressive left, and we are going to probably see a situation in which they're more brazen. The political class and the political branches are going to be more brazen in ignoring the courts.
I share your fear. 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks now, the senator from Oregon, Ron Wyden, introduced what he says is constitutional. I argue that it's not. A bill to expand the membership of the Supreme Court to 15, giving the next president six justices. Right. That is the end of the rule of law. And I don't think it's constitutional under the Due Process Clause. I think there's an argument that although the court went up to 10 and then down to 9 in 1869, that subsequent, an originalist would say it's 9 and it's going to stay at 9. I think there's a good argument for that. But boy, that is an ambitious and radical proposal from the left, Daniel O'Toole, which fits with your view of what's happening on the progressive side of the ledger.
Yeah, I mean, and it's clear what they want. They do not like a court that protects gun rights. I mean, by the way, states are already kind of neglecting the recent rulings on the Second Amendment.
Yep.
They certainly don't like the rulings on abortion and affirmative action. Yeah.
On the last, they're subverting. State institutions are actively subverting the affirmative action decision. They are ignoring the court. They're cheating.
Oh, yeah. I mean, go to any college and tell me that they're actually following what the court required in affirmative action. It's insane. Yeah.
So let's go to part two. He says, Socrates says, now then, son of Ariston, I think he's talking to Adeimantus here, your city would now be founded. And Glaucon jumps up and says, you are talking nonsense. You promise us a lot more than this gobbledygook you've given us in a city that doesn't exist and can't be built. Glaucon is really my guy in this whole book. Do your students say the same thing?
The students, they tend to resonate with Glaucon in particular because he's pushier. He has more normal human passions. He's I mean, you know, others resonate with Adeimantus, I guess, who has a kind of common sense, like, come on, Socrates, don't people need wealth and money? And aren't the philosophers kind of reckless and dangerous? So, you could say most men have a kind of Glaucon and Adeimantus in us both, a more sensible and moderate side and a more ambitious and aspiring side, kind of at odds with each other. Part of the attempt of the city is how do you get a ruling class to bring out both of those features and characteristics. So a ruling class, you can say, that's both martial and tough and virtuous and devoted to war, but not overweening and moderate and open to liberal learning and okay with having a limited amount of wealth and so forth. So a kind of courage and moderation together within the city. Or both the spirit of Adeimantus and the spirit of Glaucon together is what you want.
Now, Professor O'Toole, the four principal virtues of the just city are, as I said last week, wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. When Socrates comes to try and talk about producing those in individual men, and individual women, he begins by saying, let's start with wisdom. We'll get to justice eventually. Is that fair on his part?
No, I mean, I think it's all pretty playful. I mean, first of all, simply because you have a perfectly good city, why would you presume that it is then only made up of virtuous parts? Why not parts that aren't necessarily bad, but not virtuous? And then why would you presume it's made up of these four virtues and not other virtues? I mean, they're kind of a standard list of the cardinal virtues, but it's all, I think, very playful. And the drama is so great. I love it. He kind of plays it up.
Stop right there, Daniel. We'll come back. Professor O'Toole and I will return in a second. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. I have to break off the Plato Scholar in mid-sentence because we do have to go to a break. Professor O'Toole will be right back. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All of the prior episodes in our long series on Plato's Republic can be found at Hugh or Hillsdale.com.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. The Hillsdale Dialogue underway, and boy, do we need it after a week like we had. All I want to tell you is that I cut off Daniel O'Toole, Professor O'Toole, in the last segment. I didn't mean to. Professor O'Toole, what are we about again? Reset the stage for people who just joined.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to do process of elimination here. We're going to find wisdom and moderation and courage in the city. And then once we've found that, whatever's left must be justice. When they finally get to the search for justice, Socrates plays it up like they're going to go on a great hunt. We're going to look, and then they strike out into the night looking for justice. And then he says, wait a minute, justice is right here like a puppy rolling at my feet all along. So it's all kind of comical and playful, which isn't to say there isn't a serious point here. But I don't think that this is exactly how one would discover the nature of justice, especially within a political community. Now,
well, I think the serious point is he is clearly elevating as something to be sought for wisdom, courage, and temperance. Forget justice for a moment. He clearly wants people to get their education, to be temperate, and to develop courage. And developing courage is the hardest thing, I think. Right. And I want to talk to you about that. But isn't wisdom already taken care of in Book 3? He's done education already, right?
Well, yeah, it's wisdom. Wisdom is in only the few rulers who we're going to discover are the philosophers. And yeah, wisdom is taken care of through education, but also through a very careful process of selecting who are the gold soul, selecting the very best men, testing them, and making them members of the elite. So it's a very ruthless and strict meritocracy, enforced, by the way, by the noble lie, which defends the hierarchy of the city by suggesting that the hierarchy reflects some character of the soul, whether gold, silver, bronze, implanted into us by the god. So again, there's a kind of religious basis for the social hierarchy.
Have you had to serve on an admissions committee yet?
Not on an admissions committee. I've helped with admissions stuff here. Yeah.
What I'm curious to ask Dr. Arnn when he comes back is if the admissions process at Hillsdale is centered on these four virtues or these four qualities. What do you think? What do you think he'll say?
I think not explicitly, but implicitly, yes. I mean, I've had conversations with some of the admissions officers, and yeah, I mean, obviously you're looking for academic aptitude and curiosity and intelligence, of course, but not just that, right? You want to have students who are, tough and disciplined and public spirited, and they're natural leaders, and they're aware of their situation in the country, and they care about it. So yes, I mean, which you could say map onto basically the virtues that are discussed here. Of course, though, what we do at the college is we help cultivate and draw out and educate those virtues too. But yeah.
So wisdom is your business. That's what you're about. That's why we're talking about Plato. And all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. You're actually doing wisdom for the citizenry through the online courses. Wisdom is what you're about. I am curious if you think you're about courage and temperance.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in a way, you can't have wisdom without those other virtues as well. You need a toughness to think hard and difficult thoughts, to question your convictions. One also needs discipline, right? So that you're not distracted by the normal pleasures all around you, but you can focus on what is most important. Yeah, one of the things Socrates is trying to do here is suggest that if you have the moral education correct within the regime, again, especially for the ruling class, then the rest, for the most part, is not so important. I think that's part of the reason why it's hard to find justice. He kind of poo-poos setting up a bunch of laws and regulations. He suggests once you are down that road of needing to try to constantly create new regulations to make people behave, you're already within a sick city. A healthy city gets the fundamental thing correct first and foremost, which is education, and that is a moral education, an education that draws out wisdom, yes, but also ensures that the ruling class has courage, can fight for the city and protect it, that is, fears disobeying the city and doesn't fear battle when it's necessary, and that there's a basic moderation that pervades the whole city. That is a basic respect for the social hierarchy, a basic respect for everyone doing the job that's right for him.
Basic respect defines who we are at the Hugh Hewitt Show, and we will respectfully take a break for a moment. Reminding you all things Hillsdale, including your application for the college, is at hillsdale.edu. All prior dialogues, including in this series, at hughforhillsdale.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Daniel O'Toole. We were talking about Plato's Republic, and when we went to break, we were talking about how it stays stable. How does the Republic endure?
And if people are satisfied with their work and not seeking to get more than they deserve and not seeking to be a member of a different class, then he suggests there's more or less respect for the hierarchy. It's reasonable. And justice then is sort of, I won't say unnecessary, but follows as a natural consequence. That's partly why it's hard for them to find justice. And then when they do, they give it this very peculiar definition. Well, justice is just minding your own business. Turns out very similar to moderation.
It echoes Tim Walz's punchline in this current election is mind your own business. And that means a very different thing than what Plato means.
Yeah.
I want to go to courage next, because that's where he talks about the process of dyeing white wool and how you want to get a color to stick. And I kind of figured that out. But I think he's saying, correct me, please, hold forth, that courage will naturally emerge from good education about what is terrible and what is admirable. And that's kind of punting.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yes, I hesitate to say natural, because in some ways it's very artificial. You're really kind of beating into men. But you can do this, of course. That courage, properly understood, means fighting for the city, not exploiting the city, and being willing to sacrifice for the city. And there are a lot of ambitious, honor-loving men who can receive that opinion. What Socrates says about it is a little striking. I mean, he keeps making a point. This is political courage. And he keeps stressing it's the preservation of an opinion. And of course, opinion isn't the same as knowledge. Only knowledge is going to be possessed by the true rulers. Again, the men we're going to discover are the philosophers. but for the warriors, right, who make up the silver-souled men, they don't necessarily need wisdom or knowledge about what courage is, but they do need strong, powerful convictions that hold them to the line. And when they're fighting and when it's dangerous and hazardous, they need to stick to it and say, it's worse to flee my post than suffer whatever the battle might bring. And in fact,
Daniel O'Toole, for months, Dr. Arnn and I talked about Churchill's memoir of World War I. And when I was reading book 4 about courage being died in, I thought of people who would go over the top of the trench. Because there's a miserable, horrific, terrible war that comes through in the world crisis by Churchill, and he himself did it. The whistle would blow, and you went over the top, and I mean, the odds of getting killed or wounded or maimed or left out were overwhelming, but these young men did it by the millions on both sides. This is before the Nazis. This is just two traditional regimes of the early 20th century.
Right.
And I guess they had developed this in their young men, that they didn't ask. Yeah. It was natural for them to go over the top.
It was, you could say it's natural for young men in particular to be patriotic, first of all. And that was a big, it turns out the nations of Europe, in a way, wanted war. They saw it as a great patriotic cause in World War I. So a kind of a sense of patriotism and being bound by honor and shame, because fleeing your post is shame. Of course, one needs auxiliary precautions. You need to shoot deserters, right? So there's the dark edge there, but it's not obviously just that, and maybe even it's not primarily just that. I think most men, it's sort of, this is my job, this is my duty, this is how I serve my country, and it can be ugly, but this is what I'm supposed to do, and so I must do it. And So what all regimes do, or all regimes that survive have to do, of course, Plato's regime does as well, builds up a class of warrior men who are patriotic and honor bound.
And it can be millions and millions of people. It's not an elite like that come out of the West Point or Annapolis or the Air Force Academy or the basic school at Quantico. It is a large body. Almost everyone who turns 18 in every state is expected to defend the state. Do you think, by the way, in the United States that consensus, I'll call it the resting position of the soul, is there anymore?
Yeah. It's if it's there, it's badly depleted, and it might not fully be there. I mean, I think there are a lot of young men who are not joining the military and are afraid that they're going to be joining a sort of social engineering experiment. I mean, I think the vax and critical race theory and the various things that the military has promoted in recent years have driven the sort of normal conservative men away from joining it. And I mean, you're told young white guys, you're bad all the time. They used to be not the only element of the military, but a major part of it. And a lot of them are not joining and enrolling now. But also you just wonder, who are you fighting for? Are you fighting for your country, or are you fighting for the ruling class? Our country, one feels the divisions and factions very palpably. They're very real. And that means the normal patriotism that would lead most men to just say, well, we're at war, whether I think it's a good idea or not, I got to go and fight, I think is less there. And
I do too.
So if we're in a major war, you'd have to have a draft. And you'd have to fight. I
agree, and we didn't need a draft at the beginning of the Civil War. I think Hillsdale emptied out. I'd have to ask Dr. Arnn that. I think it emptied out of all. I think it closed basically for 3 years because everybody went to war in the Civil War. I don't know that a country that is far beyond factory, farm, and frontier, and we're very far beyond factory, farm, and frontier, whether it produces enough rote warriors. And by that, I don't mean robots. I just mean people whose natural impulse would be to say, well, I got to go down and enlist. Do you think we're there? Yeah.
I think in large part we no longer have that. I think most young people called to Russia would resist or only fight very reluctantly because they're afraid of the consequences of not doing it. Yeah, and also you could say we're not as healthy of a country. I mean, this is the other problem. The military keeps having to lower its standards. We're not as physically fit in that basic way that you'd need to be for war. That's a bad situation.
The only branch of the service that met its recruitment goals for the last 2 years was the Marine Corps, which is believed by the public, rightly or wrongly, to be the most difficult initiation into military life, right?
Right.
And
the most
Parris Island or the Marine Corps Depot out in San Diego, they think that's very, very hard, and it draws young men and women who are prepared to do very, very hard things in their training. I don't know if you ever read Making the Corps by Tom Ricks. It's really a superb book, and it's 40 years old now, about how the Marine Corps did that at Parris Island 40 years ago, breaking down people to rebuild them into Marines, and it still works. I want to move on to the third thing, which is temperance. At Hillsdale College, just like at every other college, young people are not prone to temperance on a consistent basis.
I've heard reports, yeah. It's fun to abuse them about this, yeah. Yeah, no, there are all these social gatherings and events, of course, they take very seriously because, it's always a dating opportunity, sure. You could say temperance is in some sense unnatural, and one needs temperance if one is going to live well. Obviously, it's part of the suggestion here in the Republic is what one needs is rational rule of the soul, right? A kind of reason or the calculating part of the soul marshals the spiritedness, the warrior part of the soul, and beats down the unruly bodily pleasures and money-making desires and so forth. And in some sense, the human being needs that, though I think when one gets into the details, which is probably not worth it for us to talk about some of the highly abstract discussions that come out of Book 4, but one sees it's all kind of artificial. And one thing that Socrates is really pointing to is this: the soul must be guided by desires. Even the part of the soul that wants to learn and think is guided by desires. This part of the soul that is spirited, is honor-loving, that fights, wants to fight to protect what it loves or what's its own, or wants to fight against injustice. The soul necessarily is and must be guided by desire. The question then becomes, what desires are best that should rule the soul? You could say the proper ordering of the soul is putting the right or proper desires in charge, and that means reining in or ruling over those lesser desires that fight against it and would distract the soul and vulgarize the soul. So you ultimately have to channel and rein in those lesser desires, and then in a healthy soul, they dissipate or go away in time.
It's no secret that Americans are more divided than ever. And it's not just over what policies will improve our great country. No, it's over whether America is great at all, whether America deserves our love. That's why Imprimis is so important. Imprimis looks at the issues of the day from a constitutional perspective, reminding citizens always of our great heritage of liberty. For more than 50 years, Imprimis has featured speeches from the smartest conservative thinkers and writers at Hillsdale events. These days, Hillsdale publishes people like Molly Hemingway, Andy Puzder, Harmeet Dillon, and Chris Rufo. Over 6.4 million American households and businesses receive Imprimis absolutely free. And I urge you to sign up for it today at no charge. To get your free lifetime subscription, go to hillsdale.edu/lifetime right now. Or text the word Imprimis to 71844 and we'll send you a link to sign up for your free lifetime subscription. That's IMPRIMIS to 71844.
Welcome back, America. I hope you are enjoying our long series on Plato's Republic, probably the most important work of political theory in the Western canon, going back 2,500 years. Dr. Daniel O'Toole has been our guide. Dr. Arnn will be back joining us the next couple of episodes in the Republic series. The key thing to me, Professor O'Toole, is how to get the city going. What's the most important thing that the good city will have going for it?
If one learns to love learning, one becomes less piggish and greedy and lustful.
Agreed.
So I think Socrates. Yeah.
The best summary I found in Book 4 is where Socrates says a man must become his own friend, and then his soul will be properly defined. Now, we spent an entire series of Hillsdale Dialogues on Aristotle and friendship and other examinations of friendship, but that is there. How do you understand that to work, Daniel O'Toole?
Yeah, it's well, I mean, that friendship is produced first of all by a kind of self-mastery. So there really does, just as there is in the city, there has to be in the soul some part that really prevails and beats down. I mean, this is how one learns moderation in some senses, discipline. Like, look, I see the cookie there, I'm just not going to take it. So there's a kind of fighting the desire. But also then there's the channeling and directing and drawing out of the higher desires. The desire to be moral and serious, the desire for honor, the desire to serve, and then finally and most importantly, the desire for wisdom. So there's both the kind of self-mastery in the city and in the individual, or a mastery of the ruling class, stopping men from misbehaving and taking things from others. You have to have that mastery. But then in time, at least in the individual, there's a learning and development of higher desires that naturally prevail over those lower ones and produce a natural harmony within the soul. And Socrates' suggestion here is that the good life, the truly happy life, doing justice to yourself, is preserving a harmony in the soul that allows you to feast upon the truest or highest goods, especially the good that is wisdom.
He also suggests, I want to make sure we get this in. We got about 4 or 5 minutes left, Professor. Sure. He says that virtue is a certain health, beauty, and good condition of the soul, vice, a sickness, ugliness, and weakness. And I think he says it's pretty obvious when you see it. Does he say that you're going to recognize it in people when you see it?
You can see this. Yeah. Yeah, and Glaucon says this too. I mean, you can naturally tell somebody who's upright and thriving and happy. They look alive, they look alert, they look healthy, they look engaged, they're thrown into something. They're not naturally prone to scowl or hunch over. Yeah, so I think that there are physical manifestations of, it's not obviously perfect correlation, but physical manifestations of a sort of interior harmony and love of life and thriving.
And am I right? He does not limit virtue to the guardians and the rulers. There are many other people who are not guardians or rulers who are also virtuous. In fact, the whole city's virtuous.
Yes, but when one thinks about the analogy, one comes to see that the healthiest soul must be the soul in which wisdom governs, or the calculating part governs. It seems that only those who have fully cultivated wisdom are the people who truly have human virtue. Others have lesser versions of that virtue. Remember, we were talking about the auxiliary men, the normal warriors, who are governed not by wisdom, but by opinions given to them by the city. And, obviously the normal workers within the city are, or they're craftsmen, right? And they are wage earners. They don't necessarily fully develop the virtues of courage and wisdom as only the ruling men do. So I think there's only supposedly the ruling men fully develop those virtues, but then it remains a question whether in achieving a kind of internal hierarchy and harmony and wisdom, whether that necessarily makes those men better citizens. You remember the formula for justice is minding your own business, and it's a paradoxical formulation, both in the Greek and in English as we say it, because on the one hand, it you think, well, justice, minding your own business means not meddling in others' affairs, right? So one could take it to mean, well, justice is just doing what's best for yourself, seeking the goods that are best for yourself, minding your own affairs truly. But of course, it also means here doing your job or task or duty within the city and respecting your proper place within the hierarchy.
That's what I think it means,
and then which
is to figure out what you are designed for and to do what you are designed for as well as you can and fruitfully. That's going to wrap up book 4. Right. Now, you know what Dr. Arnn's going to do? He's going to make us go back and go over book 4 again. But for now, that wraps up this week's Hillsdale Dialogue. On to book 5 of the Republic. Remember, it's an abrupt change from book 4 to book 5. But if you're reading The Republic by Alan Bloom, you'll notice it, and we will make that bridge as easy as possible to cross in a few weeks. Thank you, Professor O'Toole. Remember, everyone, Hillsdale Dialogues, all of them are contained at hughforhillsdale.com, and everything Hillsdale is at hillsdale.edu.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.